So back in 2018, the Supreme Court of India did something huge. It threw out a 158-year-old law on adultery. And this wasn't just any old law. We're talking about a law that basically treated women like property and only punished men. It was pretty wild. So let's dive right into this landmark judgment and really unpack how and why this colonial-era crime was finally declared unconstitutional. And this really gets us to the core of the whole issue, right? It's a bit of a paradox. The law claimed to protect women, but was it actually incredibly discriminatory? That's the big question we're going to keep coming back to. Can a law really be good for women if it robs them of their equality and basic dignity? It's something to think about as we go through this. Okay, here's what we've got on deck. We'll start with the old crime itself, look at the constitutional challenge, see how the court overruled past cases, break down the landmark judgment, cover what the new reality is for adultery, and wrap up with the big idea of privacy. Let's get into it. All right, first things first, let's break down this 158-year-old law. What exactly did Section 497 of the Indian Penal Code say? So check out the wording here. The crime was defined as a man having sex with another man's wife. But here's the kicker. It was only a crime if he did it without the husband's consent. I mean, let that sink in. If the husband was okay with it, no crime. It had absolutely nothing to do with a woman's consent or choice. It was all about whether her husband gave his permission. And what was the penalty for the man if he was found guilty? It wasn't a slap on the wrist. We're talking up to 5 years in prison. Yeah, the stakes were incredibly high, but only for the man. This is where the sheer inequality of it all just smacks you in the face. Okay, so the man could go to prison, right? But what about the woman involved? She couldn't be punished. At all. Not even as an accomplice. But it gets even crazier. A wife couldn't file a complaint against her own cheating husband under this law. No way. The only person who could bring a case was the husband of the woman who was part of the affair. I mean, it was so clearly a law designed to protect a husband's property. So how do you take down a law that's been around for more than 150 years? Well, you challenge it on constitutional grounds. You argue that it clashes with the most fundamental rights guaranteed to every citizen. The whole challenge, brought by a petitioner named Joseph Shine, was built on 3 key pillars of the Indian Constitution. First, Article 14, the right to equality. Pretty obvious, right? The law treated men and women completely differently for the exact same act. Second, Article 15, which prohibits discrimination based on sex. Again, a direct hit. And finally, Article 21, the right to life. Now, this one is broader. The courts have said it also means the right to live with dignity and privacy, and having the state police your bedroom definitely infringes on that. And really, it all boiled down to this one, frankly disturbing idea. The law was built on the premise that a wife was essentially the property of her husband. The crime was an adultery itself, you see. The crime was violating the husband's exclusive ownership. His consent was literally the on-off switch for the crime, which just completely wiped out any concept of the woman's own choice or dignity. Now, you'd think a law this obviously one-sided would have been tossed out decades ago, right? Well, plot twist, the Supreme Court had actually defended it before. So to really get the importance of the 2018 decision, we have to look back at what came before it. Okay, so look at this journey. Way back in 1954, in a case called Yusuf Abdulaziz, the court said the law was fine. They did it again in 1985 in the Somitri Bishnu case, and the reasoning? They said the law was a form of special protection for women, basically seeing women as helpless victims who get seduced, not as people with their own agency. So in 2018, the court had to do something huge. They had to say, hey, our previous judgments were wrong. That way of thinking is completely outdated. Overruling yourself is a big deal for a Supreme Court. And all of this brings us to the main event, the landmark judgment in Joseph Shine versus the Union of India. On September 27, 2018, the verdict came down. And it was decisive. All 5 judges on the bench agreed. Section 497 was unconstitutional. Just like that, after 158 years, it was wiped off the books. Adultery was no longer a crime in India. So what happens now? What's the new reality? Because just because adultery isn't a crime anymore doesn't mean it has no legal consequences. The whole game has just changed. This chart breaks it down really nicely. What used to be a criminal offense is now, well, not a crime. Period. The whole basis has shifted from being discriminatory against men to being totally gender neutral in civil law. And this is the key takeaway. The consequence is no longer prison time. Instead, it's a civil matter. Specifically, it can be a reason for divorce. So let's just nail down the key points of where we are today. For civilians, adultery is decriminalized, but it is absolutely still a valid and now gender-neutral reason to file for divorce. It can also affect whether someone gets financial support or maintenance after a divorce. And here's a really important exception to remember. None of this applies to members of the armed forces. You might be wondering why the exception for the military. Well, it's actually written into the Constitution. Article 33 gives the government the power to modify the fundamental rights of people in the armed forces to make sure discipline and order are maintained. So the court confirmed that for the military, adultery can still be a punishable offense because it's seen as an act that could disrupt discipline. Okay, let's zoom out for a second. This judgment was about more than just one outdated law. It was about a much bigger idea, the line between the government and our private lives. The court made a really important choice here. They sided with something called constitutional morality over societal morality. And what that basically means is that the core values of the Constitution, things like equality, liberty, privacy, dignity, are more important than what society might think is right or wrong at any given moment. Here's a good way to think about it. Constitutional morality is like the foundation of a house. It's solid, it's permanent, it holds everything up. Societal morality is more like the furniture or the paint color. It changes with the times. The court basically said that laws have to be built on that solid foundation, not on whatever the current decorating trend is. And that foundation includes protecting an individual's dignity and privacy, even inside a marriage. This quote from the judgment just says it all, doesn't it? The state cannot interfere in the private and personal lives of citizens. The court drew a clear line in the sand. They said that what happens between two consenting adults in a private relationship is not the government's business to police. It's about treating marriage as a partnership of equals, not a matter of ownership. So this whole landmark case leaves us with a really important question to chew on. The Supreme Court drew a new line saying that even within a marriage, individuals have fundamental rights to privacy and dignity. But that debate is far from over. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Where exactly should we draw the line between what the law can control and what should remain private?